Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about the image print cut it out option. Cut it out is a feature that will create cutting vectors as part of your print job. Once printed, the print can then be loaded into a Graphtec cutting plotter that will automatically cut out all the items on the printed page. This is really amazing technology, and it's going to add a huge dimension to what you can do with your large format printer. Let's get started. I'm pointing to a folder of images in my image strip. I'm going to move over to my dashboard, and under Advanced, I'm going to expand the Cutter Settings menu, and I'm going to turn the feature on. My page size is currently set to a 24 by 36 page. Now I'm going to toggle Cut It Out on and off so we can see what happens to the page when it's on. You can see that the printable area shrunk and we have this hatch pattern on the sides and the top and bottom. This is the area that the cutter needs to grab the paper and move it through the cutting process. Now looking at the Cut It Out settings, we have three types of cut vectors: rectangles, rounded rectangles for doing rounded corners, and ellipses. We're going to start with rectangles. What I'm going to do is bring some images onto the layout area. I want to work with some photo sizes for this example, so I'm going to go to my layout settings and select the photo size of 4 by 6. I'm going to double click on a bunch of images, and as they load, you can see my images have all come in as 4 by 6s, and I have some spacing between each image. That's because I have a gutter set to 1/4 of an inch. When I'm laying out my page for Cut It Out, I wouldn't normally use a gutter. I would want the images packed as tightly as possible to not only save paper, but to also decrease the amount of cuts the cutter is going to have to make. But for right now, I want you to be able to see how each image has a purple border around it. This is the actual cut vector for the image. I'm going to move one of these images out of order so you can see what's going on a little more clearly. I'm also going to move back down to my cutter settings and increase the spread setting so we can see how that cut vector moves away from the image. This spread is 0.375. Let's back it down to 1/4 of an inch. So now I have this 1/4 of an inch spread, and the knife is going to cut around the cutting vector and leave me with a very nice 4 by 6 with a 1/4 of an inch white border. In the image print layout window, we are always showing you where the knife is going to cut when the Cut It Out feature is on. I'm going to move these images around and show you that even when the cutting feature is on, we still have access to all the image print features. I can grab an image and scale it up or down, double click it to go into the Smart Crop and change the size to any size I want. I can also change the zoom factor. My cut vectors will adjust to whatever I do. Let me plug our new updated shuffle feature. We've updated the algorithm and placed 3 icons up at the top here. The first icon is for tight shuffle. If you're using an automated cutter, this is the shuffle mode you would use to pack the images in as tightly as possible, with the fewest cuts necessary. We can see how it organized the images on the page for the tightest fit. But we still have a 1/4 of an inch gutter, so I'm going to remove that and reshuffle so we can see the result. With our proprietary cutting logic, we automatically sort all the cuts, so whenever images share a cut vector, only one cut will ever be made. At any time in this process, I can add to or subtract from the page. If, for example, I don't want this image anymore, I can select it and remove it. If I want to add some additional images with other sizes, I can pre-select the size. Let me change to a 5 by 7 and add a couple of these. Then I'll change again and add some wallet-sized images to the page. Our default nesting is always adding images to the next available space on the page, but at any time you can select the shuffle icon and have them rearranged. Again, the whole purpose of this is to understand how the cut it out features show up on the layout and how organization of the layout can make cutting more efficient. As we go through these features, the next type to look at is rounded rectangles. So I'm going to switch to rounded rectangles, and you can see immediately on the screen how all the corners change to rounded corners. We can see this a little better zoomed in. The radius control will determine how rounded the corner is. As we change it, we can see that change in real time. Now, if I was cutting a rounded corner, I wouldn't want an offset, so I'm going to remove the offset by setting it back to 0. I'm going to go ahead and switch to ellipse, and we can see the ellipse drawn inside the image. Again, we can spread that if we want to expand the ellipse outside of the image. I also want to make note that there are times you will want to cut into the image, and you can do that by setting a negative spread amount. Now I'm going to go back up and change to rectangle and continue on with some of the other features. The next two are hanger spacing and hanger size. These two pertain to the actual cutting. There are two forms of cutting: perforation cutting, referred to as perf cutting, and kiss cutting. When we are cutting all the way through the paper, we use perf cutting, and when we are cutting adhesive material and not going through the backing, we use kiss cutting. In perf cutting, we use a hanger system to maintain structure in the paper as we cut it. Right now my default is set to leave a hanger every 3/4 of an inch. The hanger is a very small tag of paper. We lift the knife as we are cutting to create these hangers. They keep the image in place until we are done cutting, and then we can easily push them out. If we tried to cut through the paper using a kiss cut, the image would fall out while cutting, and the cutter would eventually jam. For this reason, when we are cutting through the paper, we are going to be using a hanger system. The more items we have on the page, the closer the hanger spacing will need to be. For example, if we are just going to cut one large image, we can get by with fewer hangers, meaning a larger hanger spacing. I'll take an image and move it into a new page. In this example, if I was only going to cut this image, I could increase my hanger spacing to anywhere from 1 inch to 1.5 inches, and I would be fine. I'm going to hit shuffle and pack these images back together. Now in this case, hanger spacing of 3/4 of an inch should be fine, but we can also control the size of the hangers. The hanger size is in tenths of a millimeter. With thick papers that tend to hold together better, I'll go down to 2/10 of a millimeter. With thinner papers that tend to disassemble easier, I would stick with 3/10 of a millimeter. Now if you're cutting adhesive materials and doing a kiss cut, you will change this setting to 0 to turn on kiss cutting. The default setting is 3/10 of a millimeter. Until you get real familiar with cutting, I would recommend leaving this setting alone. Let's move over to the side here and look at these options. The first option is called image protection. When turned on, it forces the knife to only travel between images along a cut vector. This keeps the knife from crossing over images during the cutting process. Now the default is off because you only need to use this if printing on roll paper that has a significant amount of curl to it. Paper with excessive curl might not be held flat by the vacuum on the cutter. If not, it can push up from the cutting surface and the knife could scratch the image. Image protection will help prevent this. I always recommend high quality papers on 3-inch cores. If you have to cut a page with a lot of curl, try to de-roll it or reverse roll it before cutting. The next option is called blind cutting. With blind cutting, we skip the printing process and only the shape or outline of the image is generated and stored in the job file. It can be sent over to the cutter and cut onto pre-printed media or decorative cardstock. We call this kind of cutting swag cutting. Let me find a shape to load and I'll show you what I mean. Let's use this box. This shape when cut will fold into a nice box with some petals cut out of the top that allow you to see down into the box. There is nothing here that needs to be printed. All I want to do is create the outline for the shape as well as any specialty cuts like the petals and the side cuts and store those in my job file so I can send it over to the cutter. In this mode, we turn off registration marks and you can see the page size no longer has the margins for the grip rollers on the cutter. We also expand the cutting area in this mode as well. Let's grab another image that is both a shape and a graphic. I'm going to load this frog. With the frog, I can either print the graphics and cut the shape, or I can just cut the shape. But first, we need to create the shape. I'm going to right mouse click on the image to get into my contour menu. I'm going to create a quick contour of the frog, which you can see in purple. We will go in depth about the contouring in a separate video. For right now, I just want to create the contour and return to my layout window. Now we have two options. If I turn the feature off and hit print, it will create the job file that will contain both the print data and the cut data. If I turn blind cutting on and hit print, it will create a job file with only the cut data for the shape in it. We're going to use the frog again for the final option called Cut Both Boundaries and Contours. If I was going to make a sheet of stickers on adhesive vinyl, for example, I would step and repeat the image, then print and kiss cut them with this feature off. I would be left with a full sheet of stickers I can peel off as needed. But let's say I wanted to have individual stickers with the backing still on. Let me remove the step and repeat so you can see this better. When I turn the option on, you can see the boundary turn to purple. Now what will happen when we go to cut is we can kiss cut the shape and perf cut the boundary and be left with individual stickers. The little gear symbol at the bottom here is for our cutter settings. We support both the Graphtec CE series and FC series. If we choose the FC series, we also have the option to enter an IP address if we're connected to the cutter by Ethernet. The default is the Graphtec CE series. Before we end this, let's look at the spooling system real quick. Jobs are color-coded in the spooler by either white or red. White jobs do not contain cut data, and red jobs do contain cut data. So if the cut it out feature is on in image print and you send a job to the spooler, it will show up here in red. That's going to wrap it up for the cut it out features. We hope you'll join us again for another image print tutorial.